Got an idea that keeps you up at night? Or one that makes people say, that would never work?
Perfect. That's what we talk about here on Innovation Fuel. So let's get that conversation started. Welcome back to Innovation Fuel, where we explore the real decisions shaping the future of businesses, technology, and innovation. Our conversation goes beyond success stories and into tensions, trade-offs, and strategic decisions leaders face in real time. Today, we're joined by Nicholas Ning, the co-founder and CEO of Farpoint. Farpoint is building AI systems for regulated enterprises and developing Fabric, agentic coding platform designed for organizations where traditional AI tools can be deployed because of compliance and security constraints. But this conversation is bigger than AI tools, a deeper shift happening inside organizations. For decades, companies scaled by adding people. Now we're entering a world where autonomous systems may increasingly execute workflows and alongside humans. What happens when AI stops assisting work and starts operating it inside it? Nick, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. So how are you doing today, my friend?
Today's a good day. Every day is a good day. When you're a founder, you're crushing it every single day.
Good point. Nicholas, can you a little bit explain about your journey, how you came here, and what actually you're doing?
Absolutely. So my background and my journey here is going to look like a walking red flag for any person in HR, which probably why I'm not working at a company. My background is engineering. I started at SFU doing mechatronic systems engineering. And then when I left, I actually didn't really do any engineering. I moved right into fashion. So a bit of a pivot, but I worked with a number of couture fashion houses. So like Stefano Ricci, for example, or Tom Ford, and really fell in love with fashion. From there, I left and pivoted into culinary arts, where I was a chef for a while. And so if you're in Vancouver and you're at Cardero's, there was probably a chance I'd cook something for you. But as people probably know, there's not the most money in food and cooking. And so I left and moved into finance. So I worked in Forex and commodities. I was a trader with Western Union for a number of years, and then left that, went back into engineering, but more on the business side. So I was go-to-market for a autonomous drone company, unmanned ground vehicles in ag tech, and then went from hardware to software. I was a director of marketing for a CRM company called Maximizer locally in Vancouver. And then during COVID, helped a company called Moderna as a corporate strategist. I was looking at their go-to-market for global positioning. And then serendipitously got access to GPT-2 when it was still in private beta. Got it to automate large parts of my job, kind of saw the writing on the wall, and then left and started this. Met my co-founder, Ryan, at the time. And so Farpoint, we're a little over 2 years. We always knew we wanted to be a product company, but as it would happen, if we went that route, we would go raise a seed and go spend 90% of it developing the product, validating the market, and then getting us to where we're at now. So instead, we did it through professional services, where we work with enterprises in these regulated environments where they have the problems that we want to solve, and they would ultimately be our end users anyways. And then when we find a problem class big enough, we then develop a product for it. And so the first product we're commercializing is a product called Farpoint, and exactly what you said at the top, Dave. So here we're at. It's a bit of a long way to talk about my background, but it was a fun journey.
But you're also in this collide. You're kind of separating a little bit here, because you talk about this element of Fabric. What is Fabric, and how does it differentiate from Farpoint?
Absolutely. So Farpoint, our data is professional services, right? We work with companies where most of them over the last 1 to 3 years, we're trying to figure out what is our AI strategy. And over the last year, you're looking at what is our more agentic strategy. The problem that all of our clients have is that most of them don't have an in-house AI ML team, right? You can think about like a food and beverage company, like a Cactus Club. Why would you have an in-house AI? It doesn't make any sense. And so we help those companies develop strategy, but also implement, build, and deploy. Where Fabric differentiates, it's a dedicated product. It's our first commercial product, and it serves a very specific use case within these niche and regulated environments. And I can go into that. So Fabric, the problem that it solves and the problem class that we've identified is within regulated. So regulated, I'm talking about something very specific. Government, for example, defense, healthcare, energy supermajors, finance. Within regulated, these organizations and institutions are required by law to use a certain tool base. And so when we look at something, let's use defense as an example. Within defense, there are decades worth of mission critical legacy code. And we're talking everything that powers the navigation systems on F-35s, everything from missile guidance systems, Navy trajectories that are written on systems back in the 60s, written on code bases called Fortran or Ada or COBOL. And the people who designed these systems are either retired or they died. And so as we look nationally at the necessary needs to refactor and remodernize these platforms, they have regulatory requirements, which means as an institution like defense, where you know that we need to migrate and refactor, we cannot find the human engineers necessary at a scale big enough to help us do this job at a pace we need to be on side with where modern technology is. We need technological help. And more likely, we need AI assisted help. But you cannot, at the government, just go and decide, let's just go get Lovable or Cursor or like Replit. Let's go vibe code a mission critical. You can't do that. Could you imagine using, and I don't want to call them out, you're using a vibe coding tool. You use any vibe coding tool and it hallucinates a whoopsie. And you're an energy super major that powers the major grids of Texas. And Austin just goes down because whoopsie, we fixed a bug, but it didn't know it touched this other code base and it broke it. We cannot have that happen. And so there's a number of these mission critical code bases in healthcare and finance that power the infrastructure that we use every day that these vibe coding tools cannot solve. And so that's what we've developed at Fabric.
You know that it's all this technology is evolving every day. I don't even call it every week. I mean, everyone is coming with its new versions, better one. So how you can catch up with all this technology involvement and make sure you still have your unique offering?
Yeah, we don't. That's an untenable. That's too large of a surface area. And so a lot of like what goes into my own mental lattice of how I look at problem solving is like attack surfaces and surface areas. When we went into how we positioned Farpoint, why we solely went after enterprise is if you look at any Gaussian distribution curve, when I look at the competitive landscape, in that middle, the mean, that's what I call the death zone. You go there to die. If I position Farpoint as enterprise, I compete against 7 players. MBB, your McKinsey, your Bain, your BCG, and the Big Four, KPMG, Deloitte, etc. I can compete against 7 people and I can win. I can't compete against 50,000 boutique consulting firms. I'll go there to die. It's the exact same thing with Fabric. And to your point, it's not that technology is advancing every week or every month. It's advancing like every hour. Like a week in AI time is like a year in human time. So I can't, there's no way that I can absorb and then action on all of the different advances. I can't. And so when you look at how we've developed something like Fabric, we use that as a feature, not a bug. We don't compete with any frontier labs. And the way you see this manifested in the product is that let's take the end user as the example. You are a business unit at a federal level within the government. You've gone through an 8, 10, 1-year procurement cycle to land on Copilot. That is the story of millions of businesses, right? Because it meets your regulatory requirements. You have your security requirements. Okay, so you've gone and vetted. We have SharePoint that connects to our thing that's interoperable. Fine. We selected on Copilot, and you made that decision for, in Canada, we have a 10,000 employee base, 30,000, 50,000 employee base within the government. You've made that procurement decision for these people. Okay. We on the call, and probably the listeners can agree that when you hear we procured Copilot, you would laugh. Why do we laugh? Because Copilot is objectively probably the worst of all of the frontier models available. OpenAI would run circles around Copilot. Claude runs circles around Copilot. Against any measurable thing that you would get it to do, Claude would decimate Copilot. But as an organization, you made that procurement choice. And so to your question, how do we compete or how do we take advantage of these kind of things? What we do in the product is we give you max optionality. As a business, you care about optionality. You don't care which frontier lab gives you the best model because they are all in the perpetual race of this month we have the leading, this month it's Claude, next month it's Grok, the month after that's OpenAI. And any investor made the bet that one of those labs will hit AGI first. That's not our game. As a business, you just want the optionality of what will give you the best answer today. And so you can, through Fabric, have access to any model that you want. Open source, closed source, and for our enterprise clients, we give them one-click fine-tuning where we map the entire, in this case, code trajectories, but we fine-tune a proprietary model that you own. The Canadian Department of National Defense owns, the Canadian Armed Forces owns, a healthcare player owns. That's their own sovereign model on either on-prem or air-gap deployments. And so now they own their future, that the data is not going to cloud or training something else.
I want to ask about, in your experience, as a company, for example, I'm a middle company here, and in what stage I should come to you? What should I see it's broken come to you?
So the clientele that typically comes to Farpoint, we've anchored our market position as enterprise. Our enterprise typically is 1,000 employees plus. We've talked with companies with 66,000 employees plus, going between 100 mil, 500 mil, upwards of 111 billion in annual AR. So enterprises, they have a lot more what we call at-bats. I think that's a critical thing as we look at both the Canadian ecosystem and the ecosystem at large, that we wish that the world was a meritocratic and egalitarian place, but it's not. And we can just be open with that reality. What at-bats mean is the technology diffusion is fast, but not instant. Why that's important? If you think about an enterprise that has multi-billion dollars of available spend and burn, I can take shots. Maybe I want to try an agentic thing here. I want to try a Gen AI thing here, a customer support thing there. If it fails, I get a couple more chances. We want to go and deploy agentic AI in a mom and pop accounting firm or a mom and pop restaurant. Where are you going to find the time? If you make this investment and it doesn't work, you don't get infinite shots. And so we need to be careful and we need to be deliberate and systematic about how we go and approach this. So to your question, there are things that you can do that might give you better leverage or a better understanding of where your current maturity is from AI. But our axiom at Farpoint has always been that we are experts in AI, but you are experts in your business and you will always know your business better than we do. And so you will know where the choke points are. You will know that, if only I had more time. If only I had more money. If I only had more people, I could do this. I have so many customer support tickets. If I had, Kelly's my number one customer support agent. If I had only had 10 more of Kelly's, the number of tickets I could resolve and the more business I could make. So then you can come to us and we can look at developing a solution together. How can we create a codified agentic Kelly, a digitized Kelly that is able to augment that function for you?
When people are AI exposing their organizations, are you seeing these problems that are existing? Are they coming in? Like, if you're exposing to the organizational systems, are we seeing some problems that it's identifying?
Most of our engagements, I would say 60% plus 70%, come to Farpoint at the strategy stage. They're mostly coming to us to articulate or make a robust AI agentic security strategy with them. The follow-on, what usually happens is we will identify a cluster of problems and opportunities, anywhere ranging. Probably the minimum that we've ever found within a company was 15 opportunities. Average, we do between 40 and 50. At the top end, we probably do like 70. We then present the entire opportunity surface area to the executives, and then we align on maybe 1 to 3 what we call lighthouse projects. And the lighthouses are measured against 3 distinct vectors. Number 1 being effectiveness. So have we reduced error rates? If you use AI to do this, will you get the same efficacy, the same fidelity of output as you did before? 2 is efficiency. Can we cut down the amount of time it takes? It used to take us a week to produce a quarterly analysis. Can we do it in an hour? Can we do it in a couple minutes? We work with the Crown Corporation in insurance. It takes an average claim adjuster, for example, if you have an injury. Today, it takes the average claims adjuster 40 minutes to process a claim, while our AI can do it in 3 seconds. Can we use that to clear backlogs, for example? Right. And then the last one is empowerment or enablement. It's, have we moved your people up the value chain? And it's not a matter of using AI to replace people. Our axiom of what we tell executives before we come into businesses, because people are going to see Farpoint appointments on their calendar and they're going to ask who is Farpoint, and they're going to see a consulting shop and they're going, uh-oh. And the axiom that we always lead with is we're not replacing jobs, we're replacing tasks. There are a number of tasks that you do that's highly repetitive, highly mundane, very low value. Get rid of the tasks, because the task itself was never the identity of your role. And so that's usually what we do. How the client ends up on which lighthouse projects that they decide is ultimately up to them. But then from that point on, our engineers come in to build and deploy a custom solution usually.
And when you come into these situations, do you have conflict resolution elements where you find that you're thinking this way and they're thinking this way? How do you get them onto your lighthouse projects, and how do you move them in the right direction, show them the maximum value that they can get from your integration and helping?
So we actually don't. I couldn't even count on one hand how many times we come into opposition from a technical deployment perspective. A lot of what we develop, especially on the frontier side, is literally frontier. There's no vetting. And so how we would measure this upon deployment is we have micro benchmarks. And so we would validate against your current state. So today you have X number of people taking Y number of time to complete this task. And you probably have your top performer who does it this way that, I love it. And then we try to get our AI systems to hit as good, if not better, at a consistent level as we can. Micro benchmark against a certain task. But in terms of how we come up to the Lighthouse projects, we have a scoring criteria across 17 different dimensions that net out to a return on EBITDA, or what we call your return on artificial intelligence. But there's different things that may matter to the executives. For example, psychology is one. And so even though we might be able to show a higher capital return on one opportunity, but it will take this amount of months or years to develop and deploy, there's also another one that's quicker, but has a psychological weighting where the board or shareholders or employees will see that we have successfully deployed an AI solution to market. And so they can actually see, oh, this is a muscle that we can do and develop over time. So there's a bit of variance there.
I want to ask these questions in another way. Are you always welcome in a company? They don't have any resistance to say, it's working. Why we should go to AI? Or for example, I'm going to be retired in 5 years. I don't want to do that. Have you ever felt there's any resistance or a skeptical? Tomorrow may something else is coming better than AI. So why I should spend money now? Why I shouldn't wait?
I think you can always have some level of skepticism. I think skepticism is healthy. I'll give you a stat. There is, on average, for all executives, so mid-management plus VPs, execs, C-suite, 68% of all execs are very excited about the opportunities and possibilities of AI. Increasing revenue, whichever it might be, reducing costs, all the stuff that matters to their bottom line. 68%. Less than 24% of employees are excited about the possibilities of AI. They think they're going to get replaced. This is something that is imposed on them versus something that they've asked for. They're not brought in for this ride. They're not consulted on this. This is just something that's imposed on them. And furthermore, if you look at the MIT study about why 95% of Gen AI projects fail, within that report, it cites that 24% of Gen Z and millennials are actively sabotaging Gen AI deployments within companies. That should tell you something. So yeah, is there skepticism when we come in? Hell yes. But it's not at the executive level. The executives are bringing us in to solve a very easy to understand problem, which is today, to the best of their abilities, they have hit a threshold. They are operating maximum of what the business has been able to achieve, independent of any other market variables, COVID, the weather, some celebrity, whichever it is. There is some performance threshold that they have hit. That is a theoretical maximum. Okay. Now, they cannot keep hiring. It's not a linear growth trajectory. If we put AI on top, can we improve that gap to achieve a new theoretical threshold? The answer is yes. How do they get there? That's what they bring us in to answer. So there is no hesitancy from an executive side. There is a hesitancy on the employee side. And so that is what we see as one of the biggest challenges that we overcome at Farpoint. It has always rarely been a matter of the technology that's been the problem. It has almost always been a matter of the workforce transformation that has been the challenge. How do you get people bought in? How do you mobilize an entire organization to get behind AI versus rejecting it? How do you galvanize them to understand and operate from a place of understanding versus emotion? Oh, look, AI hallucinates all the time. I don't like it. I got this bad result. I don't like that. I don't want this. Versus I understand this technology. It doesn't do what I do as well. And so I don't want to use it right now. But if the technology proves me different, I will reconsider it. That comes from an educated perspective, not an emotional perspective.
Interesting. When it comes to this element and you're changing and transitioning into these individuals, you said you're struggling with this second layer. How does Farpoint handle that situation then?
The entire process working with Farpoint is collaborative. It's collaborative from day one. We work through the entire aperture of the organization, taking in from the C-suite, from the executive, what is the North Star? Where is the organization trying to go? Do you have OKRs? Do you have KPIs within 1, 3, 5 years? What does that look like? Where do you want to be? And then how has that message been diffused and translated to your middle management? What do they think they're working on? What do they think they're responsible for delivering? And then how has that been translated to your ground people, the people doing the jobs day in, day out? Because there will always be discrepancies. Going back to that example in insurance, a C-suite may think that the time it should take to process a claim should be 10 minutes. Our leading claim adjuster, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. And you go and have an interview with the claims adjuster. I don't know what that person's talking about. It takes me 45 minutes on a good day. Where did they get that number that they think I can do? Have they ever processed a claim? Do they know how complex it is? And you always have that, regardless of what you do, right? And so we're able to reconcile all of that. And then we overlay everything from time studies to workflow analysis and everything else from the consulting rigor that we do to be able to map your current state today.
I have a question regarding the conflict that you think that most staff will have. So do you think the structure of the company can play a role here? Who's making what decision? For example, use a pilot version?
You can either lead with the carrot or the stick. Usually works better with a carrot. And so there's a couple of things that we do. At Farpoint, we are structured in 2 very distinct departments. We have Alpha and Delta. So Alpha comes in to do the strategy in the frontier. We have fellows that work on frontier aspects of AI and technology. And then so for any specific use cases, Alpha is usually involved for the ideation to figure out what technology might be necessary there. For the workforce transformation, we have Delta. Delta is just AI upscaling, just education. The idea here is we need to allow employees to go up the AI maturity and to ultimately develop an internal center of excellence within that organization. You will naturally have people whose inclination is more technological and they just like the they're better at prompting, they understand how to use agents better. It's just natural. And so it's just like we together here, we all know what Excel is. I'll bet probably one of you knows Excel better than I do. I'm not great at Excel. That's okay. We all understand how to use Excel though. And just like in those businesses, it's the same. You'll have some employees that are just naturally better at prompting than others. And so those will be the champions. You're much more inclined to listen to someone internally within your organization that's bought in versus me coming in and telling you. I can give the same training to everybody in the organization. So we're starting at the same place. Some people will understand the subject better than others. And then so with those people, we will then do deep dives within their departments and their functions. Once they have built that muscle, we then work with a smaller subset on special projects. And so we're trying to make them mini alphas of what we see at the Farpoint side so that they can take that and then they can lead their own internal projects. Our philosophy has always been like, I'm not in the business of selling you a car and then making all of my money maintaining your car. The idea is more that we give you a car you love so much that you come back a couple years later and buy another car.
Or add some nice little commodities
Or
to
add
it.
some
Like
nice,
add a
exactly.
blender. Yeah. So how much does external pressures, such as competition or market expectations, influence a company's decision to adopt AI automation?
I'd say on a good day, it's a coin flip, 50-50, driven intrinsically versus by external pressures. I'd say for larger companies, like you can look at the S&P, it's weighted almost entirely with NVIDIA. But those companies are making up for everyone else within that index. And so for a lot of those where you have the outsized pressures where, like a Walmart, you've hired everyone you possibly can. You are the biggest employer, bar none. There is a finite amount. You cannot keep hiring. So then how do you keep on growing? What other things can we look at doing? And then so for those, that's where the external pressure really starts to be seen.
When it comes to automation and coming into automation, are organizations rushing really quick into automation, or are they trying to spend some time to actually understand the outcomes and the benefit? Because you talk about that conflict between this individuals, the millennials that are trying to sabotage things. Like, are they moving even fast enough? Maybe you even think they're going the opposite direction, not going fast enough.
Do companies think about automation? Absolutely. We've always thought about automation, or we've thought about augmentation at the minimal. Transitions from industrial to ag to where we're at with knowledge work. It's all been on the same trajectory. I just think at course and speed, it's a little bit more accelerated today than perhaps before. But the overall trend line in terms of where we're intrinsically going is more or less the same. When we look at automation, there's a thing that we want to disaggregate here because we've thought about, for example, like UiPath or RPA, robotic process automation. We've thought about that for a long time. How well it's been deployed at scale is questionable. But we're seeing differences in understanding of that now with AI and with agents. And so that's one thread that we can pull. When we look at how it works logistically with people, I think the human in the loop doesn't go away yet because AIs, we have to remember, like Gen AIs are stochastic systems. They're probabilistic machines, which means that if you give an AI the same prompt, you'll get two different answers. It's not the same. And so for tasks that are deterministic, we need to be careful about what that answer is because you want it to be consistent, right? Like if we're working with something in accounting, it's numbers, it's zeros and ones. I don't need it to create me a poem about a quarterly financial analysis. Same with filing taxes, same with expenses, same with healthcare billing, anything like that. And then so when we look at automation, we're looking at how can we augment the current state human workflow so that parts of it we can take away with AI, but then the rest of it we would reserve for the human in the loop. That's still a very critical part of that automation chain, but we're not fully there yet. We are there for some instances where we can have an entire agentic workflow end to end, but for the broad spectrum of it, we're not there. Nor do I think companies and employees want to be there.
So we are kind of at the end of the show. I have questions here, and this is going to be a final question. What is your biggest challenge today?
I think it's a very typical founder answer. There's never enough time in the day. The thing with all founders, and I think CEOs, any CEO will appreciate this, is within this job, by the way, for listeners listening and thinking that they may want to be a founder, it is hands down one of the worst jobs in the world. Because what happens as a founder, what happens as a CEO is you'll have an idea, and if it's good, you will do your best to ram it down people's throats and get them to listen. And then it will be kicking and screaming and like pulling out teeth to get $1 out of people. Once you've done that a couple of times, you will have enough money to try to hire the best person that you possibly can with the amount of money to solve the problems that you have. And that person, when they're here, will solve those problems, and the problems that they can't solve will go back to you. And so it is a perpetual cycle of no matter how much money, you will hire the smartest people that you possibly can, and whatever problems that they can't solve, it goes back to you. So you are always solving the hardest problem that you possibly can. That is the biggest challenge that I have. It feels very surreal to be able to work in this sphere, in this time. There are days where I look at the technology and its applications, and there's a part of me that feels sad because it isn't what I would want our collective society to have done. Let me give you a quick example. I don't want to call them out, but like Palantir, for example, if you've looked at their Maven platform, within one of their interviews, it is optimized for the kill chain. To be able to use a Kanban board and AI to optimize for a tactical set to go in and kill people is pretty crazy stuff. Because I can as easily use that technology where I have satellite imagery and telemetry to go look at an area that was affected by an emergency, an earthquake, a tsunami, a hurricane. And I can just as easily use that satellite to identify targeted areas. And I can identify the amount of people that have been affected and use that same Kanban board to optimize for a supply chain. What are the best logistical aircrafts that I can have to package the best number of supplies that they need and drop it in the most optimized way? The exact same technology, nothing's changed. But instead of using it to kill people, I use it to save people. Why don't we do that? But that's the world that we live in. And so when we look at like AI, is it good or bad? It's kind of like it's a tool, and it's ultimately up to the people who have using and developing it. And I think it's just crazy that this era that we're going to, in this window that we're going, there's really like 10 people, there's really like 20 people that are shaping the course and trajectory of where we are going to go. We are doing our best to be a counter and to be and hold the position that we want to develop technology and show them how it should be used. But yeah, we'll see where we go.
What decisions are you actively wrestling with right now for the next 3 to 6 months?
We're currently in 17 industries, trying to expand into 32 or across 9 countries, trying to double that footprint as well. So yeah, more bodies, more problem classes. The challenges are infinite. It's going to be fun. With Fabric, we are currently starting in defense. And so there's a number of these regulated code bases within this that we want to tackle. And so we want to do it ethically. We want to be able to show what the other position might look like. There are people, men and women, that defend our country, and these are real adversarial threats, and paralysis is not an option. And even though we understand that the weight of developing in these environments carries a greater burden than just developing a SaaS product, it's not a reason to just not do it. If we have a position in our thesis and our ethos on how this should be developed, I believe that it's our job to do that and to hold that responsibility. Those are the challenges that we handle in defense. But from that, the lessons that we'll learn, especially developing and deploying in regulated environments, will be able to extend into other sectors like healthcare, which are budget constrained but working regulated, energy that needs modernization, finance, and so on and so on. And so there's a lot of those challenges that downstream are going to be resolved past this. But our day-to-day, I'm raising it right now. It's our first round. We've been bootstrapped so far, been profitable. But yeah, trying to raise while doing the product, running business. And then I've got a wife who she loves me very much, but it's definitely takes a toll on the relationship from time to time, but she puts up with it. Normal human stuff.
Nick, how can anybody here listening that intrigued and maybe wants to help finance, how can they reach you? How can they get in touch with you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
You can find it in the show notes as well, but my email, nicholas@farpointhq.com. You can find us, farpointhq.com. And if you're interested in trying out Fabric, we are still just coming out of our closed beta, but code with fabric.com. Give it a try. If you need access, let me know.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Dave. That was another episode of Innovation Fuel. Big ideas don't grow by themselves.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Share, and let's fuel the next one together.
Innovation Fuel is produced by JPod Creations. Find out more about the show at theinnovationfuel.ca.